My name is Jim Caseman, and of course, we're sharing the life story of Jim and Kathleen Caseman from as far back as they can remember as children, and then all the way up into the ministry which we are in right now. All right. So then, now in January, about it must have been the early part of January of 1979. We come to find out later that there was a Finnish couple in Helsinki that would go out to this town near the Russian border, and they would spend time praying for the nation of Finland because of their dealings with Russia. Russia in the Winter War had taken 1/3 of their country away from them because they wanted more distance between Russia and St. Petersburg and Finland. And so there was a fear of Russia. So they would spend time every year interceding for their nation. Well, while they're doing this, now this is a home of a widow, and she has a daughter who is a beautician and a son who is a daughter-in-law who's a beautician and a son who is the barber. So in the living room is a barber chair, and in the evening at 5 o'clock or whatever, it turns into one of the pieces of furniture for the living room. And of course, then she's a beautician and she's working out of the house as well. And so there's the three of them in this home. And in this one meeting that they had then at the home, when this other couple from Helsinki came in to join them, now there's 5 of them, this young lady began to prophesy. And she said, go to America and bring the message of faith back to this nation. And the message of faith. And I'll use this message of faith to bring faith to the nation of Finland and keep it safe from Russia or what have you. I forget exactly all the details. But it was, go and bring the message of faith to this nation of Finland. So then, after they had finished praying, the couple from Helsinki goes back to Helsinki, and they knew a lady by the name of Berit Heinonen. And they thought that she'd been in the United States, but actually she was in Canada. And at a Full Gospel Business meeting, she was looking at the book table, and she bought a book by Kenneth E. Hagin, How to Know God's Will, Faith Library. He must know something about faith. So they got the address off of the back of the book or whatever, and whatever address it was, I don't remember. But anyway, they copied it down because they couldn't speak English. And now this man and his sister, their brother and sister, and they get their money together. They don't have a lot of money. They managed to get enough money together to get a ticket to Tulsa. They get to the Tulsa airport, and in those years there was a directory of where people lived and what have you, and she was able to get Kenneth Hagin Jr.'s address out of there, and actually had the street address. And so they didn't know how to speak English, so they wrote it down. They copied it out on a piece of paper. They got out to the taxi and showed them the piece of paper, and he took them to the home of Brother Hagin's son, Kenneth Hagin Jr., I call him, but Pastor Hagin now. And of course, he was gone. The babysitter greeted him. She brought them into the house, and then she gets a hold of the Hagins, tells them who's there, that they can't speak English, and I guess from Finland, they must have wrote that down or something. Anyway, and they come home. They can't speak English, so they put them up in a motel for the night. And then the next day, they bring them to the Rama offices, the ministry office, and they get into, at that time, Billy Brim was the editor for Kenneth Hagin. And she then has an assistant. Billy's on the phone, and the assistant to Billy, the secretary for Billy, she figures out then, they must have a plane ticket, something to show them they're from Finland and can't speak English, and remembers that Billy Brim at that very moment is speaking to Maliska Hilk, she's a Finnish lady from Finland. And Billy met this lady in Wilmer, Minnesota. In one of the conferences that we had at the Holiday Inn, we would invite speakers, and in this particular winter, we invited Billy Brim, and I forget who the other person was. And of course, this Hilkka Maliska is her name, this Finnish lady. She had moved from Finland and was living in a little town just 6 miles out of Wilmer. And all I remember about her, she went up for prayer and she spent most of her time laying on the floor out in the spirit. And then I found out later that after the meeting that Billy ended up visiting with her, developed a relationship with her, and later on Billy would be in touch with her on a regular basis by telephone. And this is one of those days when she had called Hilke Maliska and was visiting with her when this Finnish couple walked into the office. So they gave the telephone to the Finnish couple, and so the Finnish lady in Minnesota and this Finnish couple, they're yakking back and forth in other tongues, the Finnish tongue. And then that's when Billy decided to bring this Finnish couple up to Wilmer, Minnesota, where this Hilke Maleska lived, so they would have an interpreter. And so then they brought the Finnish couple up. We got to know them. We ended up in Minneapolis in Bob and Alice Nagley's home. At that time, they were still living in Minneapolis suburb. And we had a glorious time with them, hearing their story and everything. But then ultimately they ended up out at Wilmer, where I was pastoring the Word of Faith Church out there. And the Lord had already begun to minister to my heart that I'd never been overseas before other than Canada, which is not overseas, but Canada. And that I felt that maybe I would be going over there, that this must be a door. But Brother Hagin made it clear to us, at least in those years in Rhema. He says, you don't call people up and tell them, the Lord told me I'm to come to your church and have a meeting. And I guess preachers would do that. Matter of fact, I witnessed one do that. After one of our meetings, this particular minister was in our meeting, and other ministers, of course. But then after the meeting, we were going into the restaurant, and here this minister's in a phone booth and said something to the effect of, I just got to the phone booth and the phone book just opened up and here was your name. I'm wondering if if I could come to your church for a meeting. I figured, sure, there are people that do that. Well, anyway, I knew that if this was God, he would invite me to come to Finland. So I didn't say a word, just kept quiet. And so then this is now the Sunday before they're going to go back to Finland. And they're in our church. And I'm visiting with him. And he comes up to me after the Sunday morning service. And he said he'd been praying. And he felt the Lord told him that Jim Caseman was to come to Finland and bring the message faith to that nation. And I told him I'd be right over. And so then that fall, this is 1979, kind of the midwinter of 79. And so then that fall then of 79, Harlan Guffin and I, a friend of mine, another thing, I had already, I told people, I was going overseas, but I didn't know where. This was before the Finnish people showed up. I said, I don't even know where I'm going, but I know I'm going somewhere. And a businessman then gave me $1,000. He says, well, here's $1,000 toward the trip. Then I had to do a wedding in Wisconsin, outdoor wedding. And then we got to talk. I said, yeah, I'm going. They were talking about overseas. And I said, yeah, I'm going overseas too, but I don't know where. And they gave me $2,000. And I'd forget. Then another $1,000 came in. I had $4,000 in the bank. Well, I was able to take Harlan Guffian, a friend of mine, and myself. This is my first time overseas. And so we headed for Finland. And we got there in the fall of 1979. And, here it goes. The time is up again. Well, I'll finish the thought on that one in a moment. And we'll be back for the next session. Amen.